Original actor Christopher Joner. Christopher Joner in The Reverend. No?
Yes, I was. Actually, yes. Actually, yes, I was.
Everyone calls Tom Hardy a natural, the kind of actor who walked out of nowhere fully formed, dangerous, fearless, untouchable. That story sounds good, but it's wrong. Hardy didn't arrive ready. He arrived broken, uncertain, and quietly terrified of being ordinary. What audiences mistake for instinct was actually survival. Every snarl, every silence, every controlled explosion was learned the hard way, built piece by piece when no one was watching. He didn't conquer fear by ignoring it. He studied it, he fed it, and over time, he turned it into armor. The truth is, Hardy wasn't shaped by confidence or talent alone. He was shaped by obsessions, 6 of them, men whose presence haunted him long before he ever shared a frame with them. They weren't mentors in the traditional sense, they were ghosts. Each one gave him something different when he needed it most: discipline, chaos, restraint, courage, and one of them nearly swallowed him whole. Because when obsession becomes fuel, it can either carry you forward or burn everything down, and Hardy came dangerously close to finding out which one would win. Before the masks, before the muscles, before the roles that made him look indestructible, Hardy was anything but. Early in his life, control wasn't something he had, it was something he chased. He spoke later about feeling out of place, restless, pulled between extremes. Acting didn't calm that storm at first, it intensified it. Drama school didn't give him answers, it gave him questions. How do you disappear inside someone else when you're not sure who you are? How do you command a room when your mind is fighting you? Hardy watched other actors glide through scenes with confidence, while he burned through energy just trying to stay grounded. That frustration planted something dangerous and powerful inside him. He stopped wanting to perform well. He wanted to understand power, not loud power, not showy power, the kind that unsettles people without saying a word. That hunger made him obsessive. He didn't casually admire great actors. He studied them like puzzles, frame by frame, silence by silence. And that's when the first ghost entered his life, long before Hardy ever met him in person. Hardy doesn't talk about Gary Oldman the way actors usually talk about influences. There's no professional distance, no polite admiration. He talks about him the way people talk about legends they're afraid to touch. Oldman represented something Hardy couldn't explain at first: the ability to vanish, not transform, disappear. Watching Oldman, Hardy realized the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one you stop noticing until it's too late. Oldman didn't demand attention. He absorbed it. Hardy obsessed over that. He studied how restraint could feel heavier than action, how stillness could feel threatening. When Hardy finally worked beside him years later, he froze, not out of fear, but reverence. Oldman didn't acknowledge it. He was already somewhere else, deep inside the character. That moment rewired Hardy's understanding of control. Real power didn't need noise, it needed patience. And once Hardy learned that, he never forgot it. After Oldman, Hardy's performances began to change in subtle ways people didn't immediately notice. Dialogue became optional, expression became deliberate. He learned how to let pauses stretch just long enough to make audiences uncomfortable. That wasn't accident, it was discipline. Hardy began building characters from the inside out, stripping away anything unnecessary. Masks, accents, silence, these weren't gimmicks. They were shields. Every time he chose restraint over explanation, you could feel Oldman's influence humming beneath the surface. Hardy discovered that when you say less, people listen harder. When you move slower, the room adjusts to you. That realization became foundational. It followed him into roles where menace lived behind calm eyes, and violence felt inevitable rather than loud. But restraint alone wasn't enough. Control without fire can turn hollow. And Hardy was about to collide with an influence that pushed him in the opposite direction, toward obsession that demanded total surrender. Hardy's next fixation wasn't about disappearance, it was about devotion. Watching Daniel Day-Lewis, Hardy felt something close to humiliation, not jealousy, exposure. Day-Lewis didn't just play roles, he rebuilt himself around them, then vanished again. Hardy saw what that level of commitment cost: isolation, obsession, physical and emotional erosion. And instead of backing away, he leaned in. He began testing how far he could go without losing himself, staying in character, letting roles bleed into real life, pushing his body and mind until the line blurred. To outsiders, it looked like intensity. To Hardy, it felt necessary. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was chasing truth. But obsession doesn't come with warning signs. And the deeper Hardy went, the harder it became to tell whether he was building a career or setting a trap for himself. And that's when the fire truly started. By the time Hardy fully committed to this new level of immersion, people around him began to notice the shift. What once looked like focus now felt like isolation. He wasn't just preparing for roles anymore. He was living inside them, carrying their weight long after cameras stopped rolling. Meals became quiet, conversations shortened. The line between performance and identity started to blur. Hardy later admitted there were moments when he didn't know where the character ended, and he began. But instead of pulling back, he convinced himself this was the price of truth. Watching Daniel Day-Lewis had taught him that comfort was the enemy. If it didn't hurt, it wasn't real. That belief hardened into a rule. Pain became proof. Exhaustion became validation. And while critics praised the results on screen, few saw what it was costing him off it. Hardy wasn't chasing acclaim. He was chasing legitimacy. He wanted to know if he could survive the same fire that forged his heroes. But obsession has a way of demanding more every time you feed it. And soon, Hardy would encounter an influence that didn't value discipline at all, only danger. Hardy's fixation on Marlon Brando didn't come from fame or myth, it came from chaos. As a teenager, Hardy rewound old films obsessively, studying Brando's silences, his unfinished thoughts, the way he seemed to drift in and out of focus mid-scene. To Hardy, those weren't mistakes. They were freedom. Brando didn't polish emotions, he exposed them. He mumbled, hesitated, scratched, slouched. And somehow, it worked. Hardy realized Brando had shattered the idea that acting needed precision. It needed danger. That revelation was intoxicating. Brando gave Hardy permission to be unpredictable, to lean into discomfort, to let characters feel unstable. It wasn't about technique anymore. It was about presence. Hardy absorbed that lesson deeply. He stopped worrying about being likable. He started worrying about being honest. And honesty, Brando taught him, wasn't clean. It was messy, volatile, and often frightening. That chaos would soon erupt in one of the most extreme performances of Hardy's career. When Hardy stepped into roles that demanded volatility, Brando's influence surged to the surface. Characters stopped feeling constructed and started feeling unleashed. Hardy didn't just portray instability, he embodied it. His physicality became unpredictable. His expression shifted without warning. Audiences weren't watching a performance anymore. They were watching a presence that felt barely contained. This approach made casting directors nervous and directors cautious. Hardy understood that reaction and didn't fight it. Fear was useful. Brando had taught him that danger keeps people watching. But Hardy also learned something Brando never fully mastered. Chaos needs a cage. Without control, it consumes you. So Hardy began balancing unpredictability with restraint, choosing when to explode and when to stay eerily still. That balance turned volatility into threat, and threat, he learned, is far more powerful than noise. But there was another influence waiting in the shadows, one that would teach him how to weaponize silence itself. The first time Hardy watched Robert De Niro in his early work, he didn't feel inspired, he felt exposed. De Niro didn't dominate scenes with volume or movement. He dominated by doing almost nothing. His pauses felt heavy. His stares felt invasive. Hardy noticed how silence became unbearable when De Niro was on screen. That fascinated him. He began studying how stillness could control a room, how restraint could feel louder than violence. De Niro showed Hardy that fear doesn't need explanation. It needs patience. Let the audience lean in. Let them fill the gaps themselves. Hardy adopted that lesson quietly, layering it beneath his more explosive instincts. When characters spoke less, viewers listened more. When he barely moved, tension spiked. De Niro didn't just act, he waited. And Hardy realized waiting might be the most dangerous move of all. By the time Hardy applied De Niro's lessons fully, his performances shifted again. Dialogue became sparse, movement became intentional. Every breath, every pause felt calculated. Silence stopped being absence and became pressure. Hardy learned how to let scenes suffocate without saying a word. That refinement separated him from actors chasing attention. He wasn't trying to impress audiences, he was daring them to look away. This approach reshaped how people experienced his characters. You didn't just watch them, you felt watched by them, and that discomfort lingered long after scenes ended. Hardy had now absorbed discipline, chaos, and silence into one evolving identity. But emotional truth still demanded something deeper, something rawer, and the next influence he chased wouldn't teach him control at all. He would teach him how to bleed on screen. There was one actor Hardy didn't admire from a distance. He studied him like a warning label. Sean Penn wasn't controlled, polished, or predictable, and that's exactly what pulled Hardy in. Penn's performances felt less like acting and more like exposure. Watching films like Mystic River or Dead Man Walking, Hardy felt like he was intruding on something private. Penn didn't protect himself on screen. He let the damage show. That terrified Hardy, and it challenged him. Penn proved that truth doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from risk, from letting the audience see something you'd rather hide. Hardy absorbed that lesson deeply. He stopped shielding his characters from pain. He let their fear leak through their eyes, even when their mouths stayed still. That vulnerability made his performances uncomfortable, raw, and impossible to ignore. If you're enjoying these untold influences, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this rarely get told honestly. And now I want to know, which of these influences surprises you the most so far? Penn's influence forced Hardy to confront something Hollywood avoids. Truth makes people uneasy. Studios like control. They like predictability. Actors who bleed on screen don't always fit clean marketing plans. Hardy saw how Penn's career was praised and resisted at the same time. Awards on one hand, controversy on the other. That contradiction didn't scare Hardy. It clarified things. He realized that authenticity often comes with consequences. When you stop trying to look good, people stop knowing how to handle you. Hardy embraced that discomfort. His characters stopped asking for sympathy. They didn't explain themselves. They simply existed in their damage. That choice alienated some viewers and hooked others permanently. Hardy understood that honesty divides audiences, and division creates impact. He wasn't chasing universal approval anymore. He was chasing resonance, and resonance requires risk. But raw emotion without control can spiral. Hardy needed something to balance the fire Penn ignited, and that balance came from a master of restraint. When Hardy studied Anthony Hopkins, he didn't focus on dialogue. He focused on patience. Hopkins didn't rush scenes. He didn't chase reactions. He waited. That waiting created dread. Hardy once described watching The Silence of the Lambs as a lesson in dominance without movement. Hopkins showed him that the calmest presence in the room often controls it completely. This wasn't chaos. This was discipline sharpened to a blade. Hardy began to understand that stillness isn't passive. It's aggressive when used correctly. He started letting moments stretch, letting silence breathe, letting the audience do the work. That restraint transformed his performances from volatile to commanding. Hopkins didn't remove danger from Hardy's work. He contained it, and containment made it stronger. By now, Hardy was no longer copying anyone, he was combining them. Oldman's disappearance, Day-Lewis's devotion, Brando's chaos, De Niro's silence, Penn's emotional exposure, Hopkins's restraint. Together, they formed something new. Hardy learned when to explode and when to wait, when to speak and when to stare, when to let emotion leak and when to lock it down. That balance became his signature. Viewers couldn't predict him, and that unpredictability kept them locked in. His characters felt dangerous not because they were loud, but because they were unreadable. Hardy had turned contradiction into a weapon, chaos wrapped in control, vulnerability hidden behind strength. It wasn't accidental, it was engineered. And once that system clicked, Hardy stopped chasing roles. Roles started chasing him. What most people miss about Hardy is that the masks aren't disguises. They're filters. They let him channel pieces of himself safely. Every performance is a negotiation between control and collapse. The ghosts never left. They're still there, whispering restraint, urging risk, demanding honesty. Hardy didn't defeat them. He learned how to live with them. That's why his presence feels heavy even when he says nothing. You're watching someone manage forces that could easily overwhelm him. That tension is real, and it's why Hardy doesn't explain his process much. Explanation weakens mystery, and mystery is where his power lives. He wasn't born fearless. He built fear into something useful. And once you see that, you stop watching Tom Hardy as a star and start watching him as a man constantly holding the line. As Hardy's reputation grew, so did the pressure to explain his process. Interviews circled the same questions. Why so intense? Why so quiet? Why disappear between projects? Hardy rarely gave satisfying answers, not because he couldn't explain it, but because explanation weakens effect. He understood something most actors never learn. Mystery isn't a branding choice. It's a boundary. The more you explain, the more predictable you become. Hardy chose restraint off-screen the same way he did on it. He revealed just enough to stay human, never enough to be decoded. That silence wasn't evasive, it was intentional. He'd seen what happened to actors who turned their pain into press material. It cheapened the work. Hardy guarded his inner life fiercely because that's where his performances were born. And by refusing to narrate himself, he forced audiences to focus on the work instead of the man. That distance kept his roles heavy, unresolved, and unsettling. But it also created tension with an industry that prefers clarity over complexity. Hardy's unpredictability made executives uneasy. He didn't play the usual game. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't safe either. He chose roles that felt uncomfortable, sometimes deliberately undercutting his own momentum. To studios, that looked risky. To Hardy, it was survival. He'd watched careers flatten when actors chased comfort. Predictability might pay well, but it dulls presence. Hardy wanted every role to feel like a gamble, even to himself. That edge kept him sharp. It also meant he was never fully owned by any one image. Hero, villain, brute, intellectual, he slipped between them without warning. Hollywood couldn't box him in, and that made him harder to control. But it also made him indispensable. When a role needed gravity, tension, or danger without spectacle, Hardy became the call. Not because he was loud, but because he was reliable in the one way that mattered. He made people feel something they couldn't immediately explain. Viewers sense honesty faster than critics do. Hardy's appeal doesn't come from charm or relatability. It comes from credibility. Audiences believe him because he never seems like he's performing for approval. Even at his most extreme, there's restraint underneath, an awareness of consequence. His characters don't ask to be liked. They don't explain themselves. They exist. That confidence pulls people in. Hardy doesn't chase empathy. He lets it arrive on its own terms. His silences invite projection. His stillness creates space. Viewers lean forward, filling in the gaps themselves. That collaboration builds trust. It's why his performances linger long after scenes end. You don't just remember what he said. You remember how it felt to watch him say nothing. That emotional residue is rare, and it's the result of years spent learning when not to act. Living with 6 powerful influences isn't clean. Hardy has spoken quietly about exhaustion, about needing distance between projects, about stepping away when things feel too close. The ghosts that built him never stop demanding attention. Discipline wants more precision. Chaos wants release. Silence wants patience. Vulnerability wants exposure. Balancing those forces takes effort, and sometimes it takes retreat. Hardy learned that survival doesn't always look like forward motion. Sometimes it looks like stepping back before the work consumes you. That awareness didn't make him weaker, it made him durable. He stopped confusing suffering with worth. Pain was a tool, not a requirement. And once he learned that difference, his performances deepened instead of burning out. He wasn't proving himself anymore. He was choosing carefully. Despite everything, the myth refuses to die. People still call Hardy a natural. It's easier that way. It spares them the discomfort of acknowledging the cost, because if greatness is built, not gifted, then anyone chasing it has to face the same question Hardy did. How much are you willing to carry? The truth is harder to digest. Hardy didn't stumble into power. He assembled it from obsession, restraint, chaos, fear, and discipline, then learned how to survive it. That's why his presence feels earned, and why it never feels casual. The myth flatters the audience, the truth challenges them, and Hardy, whether intentionally or not, has always chosen the truth. By the time Hardy reached his later career, the 6 obsessions no longer pulled him in different directions. They aligned. Discipline didn't fight chaos, it framed it. Silence didn't suppress emotion, it sharpened it. Vulnerability didn't weaken control, it gave it weight. What once felt like competing forces became a single operating system. Hardy learned how to let one trait rise while the others held steady beneath it. That's why his performances feel layered instead of erratic. You can sense the tension between restraint and release, but it never spills accidentally. Each role becomes a controlled environment where danger is allowed to exist without taking over. That synthesis didn't happen overnight. It took years of pushing too far, pulling back, recalibrating. Hardy stopped asking which influence mattered most. He started asking which one was needed in that moment. That flexibility became his greatest strength, and the reason his work never settles into routine. Hardy's long gaps between projects aren't signs of disinterest. They're maintenance. When you work the way he does, distance becomes necessary. He steps away to drain characters from his system, to reset the balance before it tips. That space protects the work from becoming mechanical. Hardy understands that repetition kills danger. If a performance ever feels easy, it's already compromised. So he waits. He lets hunger return. He lets curiosity rebuild. That patience frustrates an industry trained to move fast, but it preserves something rare: intentionality. When Hardy comes back, it's because the role demands something specific from him, not because momentum says he should be there. That selectiveness keeps his presence charged. Nothing feels casual, nothing feels rushed. Every return carries weight because absence sharpened it. One of Hardy's most misunderstood traits is his quietness. Silence gets mistaken for moodiness, intensity for aggression. In reality, he's precise. He understands that noise attracts attention, but power holds it. Loud performances burn quickly. Controlled ones linger. Hardy doesn't chase scenes, he anchors them. Other characters orbit him without realizing why. That gravitational pull comes from confidence rooted in preparation, not volume. He lets other actors spend energy while he conserves it. When he finally moves or speaks, the shift registers instantly. That contrast creates dominance without spectacle. It's a lesson drawn from every ghost he studied. Each one taught him that true authority doesn't announce itself. It waits until the room adjusts around it. Audiences don't respond to perfection, no matter how polished it looks. They respond to effort they can feel. That's the quiet tension at the center of Hardy's appeal. His performances carry the sense that something is being held back, not hidden, but managed. Viewers instinctively recognize that restraint. It signals discipline, awareness, and consequence. Hardy's characters rarely explain themselves because explanation weakens belief. Instead, he lets hesitation, silence, and controlled reactions do the work. Every pause suggests a choice was made. Every still moment implies a force being contained. That creates trust. People believe what they're seeing because it doesn't feel designed to impress them. It feels lived in. Hardy doesn't chase emotional peaks. He builds pressure underneath them. When release finally comes, it feels earned rather than theatrical. That's why his scenes linger in memory. You don't walk away remembering clever lines or dramatic gestures. You remember the weight, the look that lasted a second too long, the silence that made you lean forward. Audiences may not consciously analyze these moments, but they register them immediately. They feel invited into the performance rather than sold to. And once that connection forms, it's hard to break. Hardy's work doesn't ask viewers to admire him. It asks them to stay present. That subtle demand is what keeps people watching long after the scene ends. What makes Hardy unstoppable was never fearlessness, no matter how often that word gets attached to his name. Fear never disappeared. It was reorganized. Over time, he learned that the goal wasn't to silence doubt, obsession, or instability, but to give each one a place where it couldn't take over. The 6 influences that once pulled him apart became tools he could reach for deliberately. Discipline kept chaos from spilling. Silence gave emotion weight instead of noise. Vulnerability added truth without exposure. Nothing was wasted anymore. That's the difference between burning bright and burning out. Hardy stopped treating struggle as proof of worth and started treating it as material, something to shape, not surrender to. That shift changed everything. His performances no longer feel like acts of survival. They feel like acts of control under pressure. You can sense the effort behind them, but never panic. The danger is measured, the restraint is intentional, and that's why his presence feels grounded even at its most extreme. The myth says greatness arrives fully formed. The truth is far less romantic. It's built through repeated confrontation with your limits and the discipline to stop just short of losing yourself. Hardy didn't escape his ghosts. He learned how to carry them without letting them drive. And that's why, when he's on screen, it never feels accidental. It feels decided.